Hello everyone and welcome back to another Fat Thoughts, a big fat juicy spoilery thoughts today, because we're going to be talking about everything that I can remember at this current time about Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Now normally I would just do this in the Games of the Year video that I do at the end of the year, but I have a lot to say on Xenoblade 3 and I felt like it might need its own video. Plus I wanted to show off a new thing that I've got because it's on the subject of Xenoblade, so I just wanted to show you this art that I got from the Burning Brew, and I'll just show you quickly. You might be able to see it there. There it is. It's the Mechonis Awakening. I absolutely love this piece of art. I love everything about it. I love the sheer, like, just the imposing nature of the Mechonis. He's grabbing the sword, you know, it's when the Hyentia and Nopon are like in complete disarray because of what's happened. Just an incredible piece, really. It's an incredible scene in the first game. It's my favourite moment in any of the Xenoblade games, so yeah, I'm like super happy with it. So yeah, thank you to the Burning Brew for doing this piece of art, and super happy to have it. Yeah, let's talk about Xenoblade 3. There's a lot to discuss with it. It has been the game I've been the most excited for years, like probably since the second Xenoblade game, to be honest. It's been like that much, and even I would say it's been even more than the second Xenoblade game, because the second Xenoblade game I didn't think much of, like in terms of like leading up to it. Like I was just excited to get another Xenoblade game, and the same thing was the case with Xenoblade X. You know, they come out, said it's not connected to the other in the first one in any way, and then it's just another Xenoblade game. Then I played it, absolutely loved both of them. Obviously with the second one, the big plot twist at the end that, oh, 1 and 2 are connected. So that just blew everything out of the water, and that is the most jaw-dropping moment I think I've had in a game, like, ever, really. I remember just being there, like, I think it was close to midnight as well. I was like, what? And like the ending of Xenoblade 2, like leading up to the end of it, I remember that my housemate would come home and he would come into the room and I'd be like a zombie playing the game still at like 4 in the morning because he did night shifts. And so he'd come home and he was like, Ben, go to bed. I couldn't. I was like, what? Just one more. I remember specifically the bit. It was the bit where you're climbing the world tree, and I think Indol just got activated and it started firing at the world tree. And there's like, you know, you had like an object. You had your objective counter at the top of the screen, like, oh, how many more steps to get to the objective? And I was like, just the next objective. I'll turn it off afterwards. And he wasn't having any of it. Like, he put me to bed, and thank God, because I would have been on it all night. Like I don't think I would have slept for like 3 days for the ending of that game, because I loved it to pieces. But I love the whole game to pieces. I love Xenoblade 1 and 2 to pieces. I love X to pieces as well. That one's such a different kind of Xenoblade game. So I was just so excited to see the fact that Xenoblade 3 was a continuation of 1 and 2. It was, you know, getting these two worlds together. The futures of 1 and 2 coming together into like this big monster of a game. I just thought of all the crazy things that they were going to do with it, and I was just super excited. You know, you saw Melia, well, what you thought was Melia and what you thought was Nia in the trailer. You saw the Mechonis sword, the Orion Titan, and my mind was just going crazy. I was like, this is going to be like the most incredible game ever, the most incredible series ever for me, because, you know, I've said before, but Xenoblade is easily my favourite game series of all time, and Xenoblade 1 and 2 are my 2 favourite games of all time. So yeah, I was super excited, like to the point where it was getting to the point where I was not hyping responsibly. Like I was saying it to my friends, like in the week on the lead up to the game's release. I was just like, I'm not hyping responsibly, guys. I'm like getting butterflies from how much I'm excited for this game. And you know, as I've gotten older, I don't get that excited for like much anymore. Like not in that way anyway. Like the last thing that I got super excited for was actually Spider-Man No Way Home last year. And before that, I don't remember ever feeling like this excited for something, you know, in recent years really. I think the last time would probably been for like the release of Pokemon X maybe, or Pokemon Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. It was definitely for a Pokemon game years ago. But yeah, this one just, it took me. So on Friday morning, I took the day off work actually to play the game. So glad I did, because I was able to get a really good time with it. And as soon as I was on it, I was like, oh my god, I'm playing Xenoblade again. And it was just brilliant. Like the opening is so strong. It has this incredible cutscene where you sort of see the main protagonist Noah as a kid, and it looks like he's in like a Colony 9 area. Like the architecture of that area is very Colony 9, Colony 6 from Xenoblade 1. And you're like, oh god, what is it? What is going on? And you see Al come off in the background, and there's like fireworks going off. And Noah all of a sudden sees this, like, it almost like reminded me of the planet scene in 1 and 2, you know, where you just see the whole, it's when the new universe is being born and it just wipes over the Earth. I thought it was that. Didn't really get a good look at it because it happened so fast. So it didn't end up being that, and we'll get into what it was in a minute, but I just want to exclaim how strong the start was. It was so good, like, just you're thrown straight into it. It's a big contrast to Xenoblade 2, really, and one in a way, like, one built it up really well, I think. Like, I'll talk about pacing in a minute, but one's pacing, if it was like a flowchart, I guess, is like just a steady incline. Yeah, the one where it goes up, but it's like a steady incline, like constantly going up until the end. It's brilliant. 2 is, it starts off very slow too. I would say until like chapter 3 maybe. It sort of like rides, it's going up but very slowly, and then all of a sudden, as soon as you hit the end of chapter 3, start of chapter 4, it just goes bump and then goes up until the end, and it ends brilliantly. And 3 like started off really strong, and then like as you get into the game, it really slows things down, and the game story-wise sort of went up and down throughout the whole game. I want to talk about what I really liked about Xenoblade 3 first, because unlike the other two Xenoblade games, there's a lot of things with Xenoblade 3 that I couldn't just gloss over. Like 1 and 2, I know about their flaws. I know about the obtuse collectibles in Xenoblade 1. I mean, Definitive Edition fixed a lot of that, but Xenoblade 1, I can't really fault since Definitive Edition, to be honest. Like, I think it's just an incredible game. There's really no critiques I can give it. Xenoblade 2 had the poor UI at times, it had some iffy quests. Xenoblade 1 has a lot of fetch quests, I suppose you could say. There was some questionable character design, which I've always said has never bothered me, but for some, it put them off the game completely. It had the really poor tutorials that apparently lied to you. I don't remember this, because like, Xenoblade games are like, they pelt a lot of information at you, and then I sort of just learn as I play the game. Like, I don't feel the need to know it all straight away. I just sort of play and figure it out as I go. But 2 was definitely a lot more complex than 1, so it was harder to do that. And its tutorials definitely didn't help there. And you can't even review them, which is something my friend SPO still goes on about to this day. But none of those critiques that I have about 1 or 2 matter at the end of the day, because the stories are so good, the characters are so well written, the soundtracks are incredible, and the worlds are such a joy to explore, and they feel so real and realised by the incredible writing team. 3 has problems in areas that I consider to be the most important in Xenoblade, which would be the story, the music, and actually, to be fair, that's probably about it. I'll say the world as well, because those 3 things really, I think, are a lot weaker in Xenoblade 3 compared to the other 2 games. I think the characters are still incredible. The characters are still really incredibly well written. I welcome them with open arms to like the Xenoblade family. I love all the characters in this game. I don't think that they're fleshed out in terms of their interactions with the world are very limited, and that's one thing that hurts the game as well, is the fact that they don't interact with the world that much. Like 1 and 2, the worlds are so, like, the worlds are almost their own characters. You've got the world of Bionis and Mechonis, these 2 amazing like living titans that are now dead, and that's where everyone lives. And it's so interesting to see that, oh, I'm on the Bionis leg, oh, now I'm inside the Bionis, now I'm on the Bionis back, because like your back ends up getting sweaty. If you're hot or what have you, that's where like the hot region is, because it's it's Magna Forest, and so it makes sense, and it just felt so well thought out. Mechonis again was like this completely other different being that was nothing like Bionis, and it was so incredible to explore that as well, because I thought we originally played Xenoblade 1, I thought you'd only explore the Bionis, and then the Mechonis was like being left for the second game or what have you, and then my complete shock and surprise and delight when we was actually able to go there, I was like, oh my god. And then in Xenoblade 2 you had all these different titans as well that all had their own cultures, and you saw how those cultures interacted with each other, and how the blades were such a fundamental part of that world, and how the relationship of blades was something that humans had to struggle with and come to terms with, because they're almost like people as well, and it's not something that the architects who made the blades in that world in that way intended for, but it shows you, it goes to show how like humanity will do anything to survive and cultivate. Like they'll try and keep everything that they can there. And also it was a big game about relationships as well, and what would we do for the ones that we love and all that good stuff. So I just found those stories so in depth, and the worlds were a big part of that. Xenoblade 3 is a combination of 1 and 2's world, and it just doesn't seem, they don't explain a lot of history about Ionios, which is the world that Xenoblade 3 takes place in. And it's because it makes sense narratively and thematically, because the characters are they only live for 10 years. So like, how are you supposed to learn about factual things when you're only here for 10 years? And there's a Lance, one of the main characters, makes a great point in one of the later quests, is that it's, well, I guess I'm talking about spoilers, so I'll spoil it now, but it's in Nia's quest later on in the game. She's explaining where the Uriah Mountains come from her world, and Lance, you know, that she says that's why they're funny looking, because it's, you know, Uriah, and Lance sort of says something like, oh, now that you mention it, I suppose they do look pretty funny. You know, before all this, I would have never really bothered to even question it. And that's the thing, they've got 10 years, and it's all consumed by fighting to live, and they just don't question the world at all. And it's one of the things that I didn't realise at the time, but afterwards, after playing it, realised that was something missing from the world, from the game, because they talk about little things like a Sophronia tree and stuff that's important to them as characters, but they don't like go through. Let me try and pronounce it. It's like Mac the Wildwood, and it's like a combination of Macna Forest and the Land of Moratha from Xenoblade 2. Macna Forest from Xenoblade 1 and the Land of Moratha from Xenoblade 2. And when they're going through it, it's like these big scientific skyscrapers covered with leaves and vines and foliage and stuff, and they never once question it. No one even like says anything. Like, no one's like, damn, what's this place? Nothing. There is nothing there. And it's only later on, like I said, when Nia explains about the Land of Moratha and where all these buildings come from, that the characters are like, oh, right, okay. And like I said, it makes sense narratively, because the characters aren't going to question that, because they haven't got long here. You know, they're not going to spend... You're not going to spend... If you've got 10 years to live, and most of it is to do with fighting to live, you're not going to spend time going like, there's a tree on a weird building, that's a bit weird. Like, you're not gonna. It's 10 years is nothing, and that's a big point of the game. So I get it, I understand it, but because of it, it really does make the world lose character, you know. And part of it as well, I think, is because it's so much of Xenoblade 1 and 2 coming together, that a lot of it isn't. It's not like original stuff, like the sword. They talk about going to the city in the sword for like half the game, and no one even questions it being a massive sword. It just doesn't make any sense. There's a moment in the game where you end up getting to this city within the sword, and then that for me became where the world building got to Xenoblade 1 and 2's levels of quality, because that's when you learn about normal humans. Because I'll try and explain the world the best I can, but essentially it's 1 and 2's worlds, universes, are wanting to come back together. They're trying to merge back together. I don't know why they're trying to do that. I'm assuming it's because the conduit pissed off in 2, but we don't get confirmation on that. In fact, I'll just quickly go ahead and say, because I'm going to have a little rant about this in a minute, but there is absolutely nothing to do with Klaus, the Trinity processor, or anything of that side of the plot. You know, the thing that's been in 1 and 2 and has really been pushing this overarching plot along, there is none of that in this game, and that's one of my biggest disappointments with it, to be honest. There is that side of 1 and 2's worlds coming together and stuff like that, but there is nothing pushes the plot forward. But I'll try and get into that in a minute, because like I said, a lot to go over. Sorry about this for jumping around. The story is about the two worlds coming together, and if they do come together, they're both going to like pretty much like collide and destroy each other. So Melia and Nia, I'm assuming when the worlds got closer, were able to make contact, and they decided to create this arc called Origin. One world would create half of it, and the other world would create the other half, and they would store their people's souls and data inside this arc. So when the worlds collide, the worlds will be destroyed, but the arc would remain, and these people will be able to be reborn in whatever world come after the explosion. The villains of the game, Mobius, essentially come from the souls that were inside Origin. They become like really uncertain, and they fear the future. You know, they would rather things just stay the way they are, and because of that, those feelings manifest and corrupt Origin, and they give birth to what is known as Zed. As we're going to call him Z, it's like, no, do the British pronunciation, to Zed, and Z, X and Y, because all the Mobius are named after, you know, a letter of the alphabet. So there's 26 in total, although we don't know who Mobius A is. Apparently Mobius A isn't in the game, and I should have said this at the start, to be fair, but I have beat the game and I've played quite a lot of the side quests. I've not 100%ed it, and I've not done all the side quests. I really want to go back and play through the whole game again, but I want to give it some time before I go back, because at the moment I'm wanting to go back because I just want to try and find things that fill in the gaps in the story for me to make me completely satisfied with it, but I know that's the wrong reason to go back and play it, because with Xenoblade 2, I was satisfied when I left it. Same with 1 and 2, I was completely satisfied when I finished the games, I then couldn't wait to go back and play them to experience it again. Whereas at 3, when it finished, I was like, but again, we'll get into that in a minute. I'm sorry for jumping around. So yeah, that's the story. And then Mobius essentially took over this new world, Ionios, which when Mobius was activated, Origin essentially froze the two worlds in place and created a new world between them. And time is essentially frozen, but it's weird. Time as we know it is frozen, but it's like Ionios is in its own little bubble where time progresses. But as the worlds are slowly moving closer together, Ionios is getting destroyed, which is what they call these annihilation events, where parts of the world just like pop out of existence essentially. And Mobius has taken over this world, this Ionios' world. Essentially what they've done is they've used Origin and the souls of people who are in there. They're rebirthing them, so they're being born essentially as like 11 to 12-year-olds, and then they'll live 10 years to like 20, 21 I think, and then they'll die, and then the rebirth process will start again. And what they're doing is they're getting all these humans to fight each other, because when they kill each other, their life force goes into these flame clock devices, which power Mobius and essentially keep the world frozen in place. So it's like, it's a bit like Xenoblade 1, where it's like the circle of life, where Zanza made it so when Homs die or High Entia die or what have you, they go back to the Bionis, and essentially they're like food for Zanza. They're born from the Bionis and they return to the Bionis, and that's essentially what it's like in Ionios, except for these flame clocks that weren't supposed to be used. Well, they don't know about flame clocks, but this Origin wasn't supposed to be used for nefarious means. It was supposed to be used to store people's memories and what have you. And I like that. I like the setting. I like the narrative. I like that device. I think it's really interesting and stuff like that. I just wish it just moved the overarching plot along a bit more, because I remember before this game came out, I was like, I saw one trailer and I saw like a few advertising pieces, and I was like, okay, so it's gonna focus on this story that Xenoblade 3's got, because each Xenoblade has its own world to develop, which is amazing, because each story is so deep, and then you realise that actually, the biggest story, it's not even the biggest story, but like the overarching plot is like, it's there, but it's in the background, but it's still so interesting. That's one of the reasons I love Xenoblade so much, because they can create these incredibly detailed and in-depth worlds with their own relations, but still have this overarching plot that's like really mysterious and interesting. But they've always kept it mysterious in the right way. Like in 2, when you learn about the conduit and what happened to Klaus and how he was split in two, and he made the new universe and he was transferred, that it just opens up the scope of the world so much more. And Xenoblade 3 doesn't do anything with that. It doesn't move anything along, and that was my biggest disappointment with the game, because that's what I would hope to see. And I understand that from like my point of view, my own hopes and desires for the game. I think I even said in my hopes and dreams video, which nearly none of my hopes and dreams came true. And I know that's partly on me, but I also think even if this story is what it is, because at the end they defeat Zed, but the worlds decide to just go off and be their own thing again. I don't know how they did that, to be fair. I don't think that was ever explained, and there's just not a lot explained in general. My biggest issue is the time between 1/2 and 3 is never ever brought up. Like, it's just unknown. We don't know how old Melia is, we don't know how old Nia is, we don't know if the other party members were still alive, because this world, Ionios, has apparently been going on for like 1,000 years or what have you. And you're thinking, right, well, how come, because Melia and Nia they're not in the arc, they weren't rebirthed, they're the same Melia and Nia that we knew from the other games. I'm just thinking, like, if this world's been going on for 1,000 years, how are Melia and Nia still alive? High Entia, they only lived I think it's like 600, 700 years, and if you go by Xenoblade 2, Minoff, who was a flesh eater in that game, he lived for around 500 years, maybe not long after the events of the second game. Because in Torna, where you first find Minoff, he was, a young lad. He was still a blade, but he was a young lad. And then by the time of the main game in Xenoblade 2, 500 years have passed and he's an old man. So, and Nia is barely older, but she's probably 10 years older, looks-wise, in Xenoblade 3 than she is in 2. But if it's been 1,000 years, how on earth is she still alive? These things just do not get explained or answered, and it's so frustrating, because these are holes in this world that that were never there before. Like Takahashi and his writing team have always done a brilliant job of explaining stuff. Some times you have to take a leap of faith in what have you, but it makes sense in the context of the world. This just doesn't make sense. You know, I want to know these things. Like, I want to know if the heroes from 1 and 2 are actually dead. Nia makes this comment about how they might not be dead because there's a picture of them all with Giga Chad Rex, which I love the meme of. Nia says like, I'll see you guys soon because Poppy's still alive, which I'm still thinking, right, if Poppy was still alive, Poppy can fight, why wasn't she in the story? I think that there's a lot of things about 1 and 2 that they could have done stuff with, but they don't want to alienate people who didn't play 1 and 2, and that was my biggest fear going in. You can go back to my Hopes and Dreams video about Xenoblade 3, and one of my biggest hopes was the fact that it feels like you had to have played 1 and 2 before 3. And you could say, yeah, you should play 1 and 2 before 3 to understand everything. And yeah, you do need to play 1 and 2 to like fully appreciate and grasp everything, but they should have gone all the way. Like, they play it so weirdly. They like almost tease you with it. Like, there's like, oh, there's Melia and Nia's quests and stuff, and she explains stuff that happened in 1 and 2, but she never goes into detail. I've got to admit, I do love those quests about Melia and Nia, because when the game ended, these 2 quests about Melia and Nia, they can only be done in the post-game. There's not really a post-game. It's, you know, you finish the game, go back on the save file, you're tucked before the final boss, and then you can go do these quests. I don't know why they made it a post-game thing. Xenoblade has never really had post-game stuff. You know, it's always been New Game Plus. I don't know why they decided to do it this time. It was a bit weird. Those quests are amazing, and they cleared up a lot of issues I had with Nia and Melia's, like, not characters, because they're still the same characters we love, and they've done a great job at making them feel older, but still the same characters from 1 and 2 that we love. And yeah, I absolutely adore Melia and Nia in this game. Melia, I felt such a, like, her quest is about her, like, really missing her Xenoblade 1 friends, essentially, and how she feels a bit lonely, and, you know, because she's the only one left. And that's why I do hope that she is the only one, like, that the others have passed away, because I think it'll make them for a much better timeline. You know, nothing lasts forever, and that's one of the themes of Xenoblade 3, is that, you know, nothing lasts forever. We've always got to look forward to the future, and we've got to keep moving on. And if they are still alive, but they've made it so that, you know, they're frozen in time on the other world, and Melia misses him because it's been 1,000 years in this world, it just gets a bit messy, I think. And that's one of the things I think in general about Xenoblade 3's ending, is it just gets a bit messy. Like, the self-contained story in 3 is brilliant. I still think it's weaker than 1 and 2's. I think that the characters are brilliant. I think the world is really good. I just wish it was fleshed out a bit more. And I think the most disappointing thing about it is the fact that there's only 7 chapters in the game, even though the game is, like, I would say it's probably a tiny bit shorter than 1 and 2, if maybe a bit longer. I did a lot more side quests, because the side quests I think is the best in the series, to be honest. I had such a good time with the side quests. I did so many of those, and I ended up with a larger playtime than I did with 1 and 2 on my first playthrough. But there's only 7 chapters in the game. The story only really got going around the end of chapter 4, I think it is, when you get to Keva's castle. And then it peaks at the end of chapter 5, start of chapter 6. And unlike Xenoblade 2, where, yeah, it got off to a slow start, but once it got going, it just went and, like, did not stop, and was brilliant from that point onward. I think it was brilliant from start to finish, but, you know, I can understand the slow start putting some people off, but the slow start, like, started, it went up, and then it went up, and it finished brilliantly. Xenoblade 3, it's like, it starts like that, and then, like, basically flatlines for a bit, and then goes up again, like, way up, to the end of chapter 5, and then just as you think things are starting to get going, it just sort of, like, lingers for a bit, and then it never really picks up again. Mainly because I was waiting to see, like, the grander vision and the grander story here, but the grander story just didn't do anything for the overarching plot, so it lowered the scope of the games for me. Mainly Xenoblade 3, because this is almost like a footnote in the actual, like, overarching plot, because the overarching plot in 1 and 2, like, you know, you kill Zanza and you're the new, there's no gods in that world now. Xenoblade 2 was about the Trinity process and the conduit pissing off, and, like, the destruction of that world, and the reveal that it's connected to Xenoblade 1. Xenoblade 3 is like the futures of those worlds, but it's not. It is, but it's got, like, no depth to the other 2 worlds, and that's a big disappointment for me. It's a huge disappointment. You know, like I said, I finished the game just feeling a bit like, oh, I see. And then I did Melia and Nia's side quests, and I really enjoyed them, and I liked it a bit more then, but I was still like, something just doesn't sit right with me. And I thought I was the only one feeling like it, because I'd seen, like, such good praise for Xenoblade 3 elsewhere, and then I started seeing more people thinking my thoughts and the way I thought, and I thought, okay, it's not just me then, like I do have some merit here. The story and the narrative is such a big part of Xenoblade, and it's the thing that really immerses you in the world, as well as the music. And I also got to say that as much as the soundtrack is growing on me day by day, I think the soundtrack is the weakest in the series so far, unfortunately. I kept waiting for that one track to blow me away. You know, like Xenoblade 1 had Engage the Enemy, An Obstacle in Our Path, Mechonis Field, Sator Marsh, Valak Mountain at night, like Sator Marsh in the day, which not a lot of people talk about. There was so many amazing tracks, even Colony 9, and there's so many great music, so much great music in Xenoblade 1. And Xenoblade 2 is the same. Like, I remember when I first played Xenoblade 2, I was like, for a while I was like, I don't know if this soundtrack is hitting me the same way Xenoblade 1's did. And then I heard Deathmatch Returner, I heard obviously Counterattack, I heard the Old Factory and Cliffs of Moratha theme, I heard the Versus Driver theme, like Fonza Mima at night. Just such incredible music from that game too. Those two are like two of the greatest game soundtracks, two of the greatest soundtracks of all time, I think. I don't know which one I put above the other, to be honest. Like, they're both incredible. Xenoblade 3 is just, it's a lot more quiet, and I think that's maybe to reflect the more serious world that they're going for. And it works, it does work, but that even the battle themes, which, even if you got a more serious world, the battle themes could still be incredible. And the Mobius battle theme, the normal one, is great. But the rest of the battle themes sort of remind me of Time to Fight from the first Xenoblade game, like the regular Bionis battle theme. I was never massive on that theme, and it's almost like all the battle themes in Xenoblade 3 are a bit like that. They're really choir heavy, which is fine, but there's like no riffs or like insane drops or anything like that, apart from the Mobius theme, I should say. And like, even when the battle theme come around, I didn't really, not battle theme, boss theme come around, I mean, it was cool, it was definitely a boss, but I don't know, I didn't feel like it held the same sense of scale as An Obstacle on Our Path, or Incoming from Xenoblade 2. Yeah, it's a big shame that, because this is a really emotional tale, probably the most emotional tale that Xenoblade has told, but the music just didn't bring me in like it did with 1 and 2. And you know, by the end of 2 I was like a wreck, like emotionally, because of what happens at the end of that game, and just felt like so satisfied at the end. And same with 1. Like, I was so happy with that game that I cried of happiness. I was crying that it was over. Xenoblade 3, it just sort of, like, it was a great emotional tale for the characters, which I love. You know, for the way the game ended and the world ended, there's no other way that I could put it than just, I was unsatisfied with the ending. And the story as a whole, to be honest. I think it was great, it had a great concept. It just didn't help that there wasn't a few things that drive the plot along consistently. Xenoblade 3 is like, like on the flowchart. You know, there's not a recurring villain. There's one in Yorin, but he doesn't appear until like chapter 3, which is already like a quarter of the way through the game. You know, Metal Face and Jin and Malos, they were there from essentially the start of the game with Xenoblade 1 and 2. You didn't really have a recurring villain in 3. Another thing about Xenoblade 3's plot is it reminds me, the first like half of it, until you get to the city, which is when it gets really good. It reminds me of a Dragon Quest plot. It reminds me of the Dragon Quest XI's plot, where like the first half of the game is like you're on this buddy road trip. Except with Dragon Quest, the world is like colourful and bright and vibrant and funny and just such a good time, like such a good laugh. Xenoblade 3's world is like serious. You know, people live to fight. Mio's only got 3 months left to live. And it still feels like they're trying to go for like this road trip thing, because just nothing happens. You know, like little glimpses, and this is something as well, because like there's little glimpses of what's coming next, but they keep you questioning stuff for way too long in this game, I think. Obviously, you'll figure stuff out before you're supposed to, I think, or not even before you're supposed to, but like before it's revealed to you properly, like N being another version of Noah, and M being another version of Mio, excuse me. Who are these other consoles? You know, where did they come from? Why is this world like, you know, Bionis, Mechonis and Alres, but not quite like it? And then the reveal happens. Sorry, I bumped the mic there. But the reveal happens, and you're just sort of like, oh. I was like questioning that all game, and now I'm not very satisfied with the answer. So yeah, Xenoblade 3 for me, I hope I've said everything here. I really was quite disappointed with the story, and that really hurts to say, because I thought this was going to conclude the Klaus saga, and it hasn't. And I don't know if they've done this so that they can just keep making more games in the series, which If it is, that really bums me out, because in a world where Marvel, for example, just do not stop making stuff. They never, you know, they had Endgame as like a conclusion, but then they started it all up again and what have you. Like, everything has to set up for something else. And with Xenoblade, I hoped it would finish off this saga of Xenoblade. You know, you can still do Xenoblade X, you can even do a Xenoblade Chronicles 4, but have it set way in the future with a whole new cast and overarching plot and what have you. But they chose to carry on the stories of 1 and 2, but not really. And the stuff that I actually would have loved to have seen to make it more cohesive, to make it so you know what happens from the start of Xenoblade 1 to the end of Xenoblade 3. But you don't, there's so many holes missing, and it's so frustrating, it's so infuriatingly frustrating. I can't wait to play the game, like I said, because the gameplay is probably the best that the series has ever seen. Like I said, the side quests are amazing too. The world itself, despite not having any like narrative character, is a lot of fun to explore. There's a lot of nooks and crannies to find. The world design, I think, is excellent as well. Maybe part of it is that, well, I thought part of it was the fact that because there's no Titans in the game, maybe it's because of that it's lost a bit of character. But I thought Xenoblade X, his world, Mirror, that's just a planet, and that had so much character going to it, because people talked about it, people talked about the world, and they just don't in this game, and I think that's a big thing missing from it. But the combat, the gameplay, the exploration, it's all great stuff, and that's one of the reasons why I can't wait to get back and play the game, because the game is really fun to play. I love the new chain attacks. I think they're probably the best that they've been handled in the series. The hero system is cool, although it did bring me onto one thought, and that's the thought of the party members. You know, like, you essentially get your whole party from not very far into the game, and I think that might, you know, that might make the game feel stagnant a bit, because in Xenoblade 1 and 2 you consistently get more party members and new characters into the game, and that way the dynamic of the party changes, because in 3 these characters are nearly always together, and you have very select moments where 2 characters will talk together to build their relationship, but the dynamic of the party is almost always the same because they're always together. You know, in Xenoblade 1, Shulk and Ryan being together is like a buddy cop drama. You know, it's brilliant. And then when they get Charlotte, it's 2 childhood best friends with this young woman who they've just met, who is trying to save her brother. And then Dunban gets added to the mix, and it's like, yeah, Dunban's back. And then he's like a mentor figure to them that they haven't had for the past, 10-20 hours. And then Melia gets added, who's, another, well, she's not young to those guys, but, she's like 80 years old, but she's a young Hyentia of another species. And, she's interesting, she's like she's got new culture dynamics with the Homs, and it adds layers to the story as well, because then when you get to Alchemoth, you learn about their culture and everything that's going on. And Xenoblade 3 just doesn't have that, because it keeps the characters very close-knit together, and probably is the most close-knit party so far. But like I said, because the narrative was just not, I just wasn't in there like I was with Xenoblade 1 and 2. By the end, when they end up splitting up and that, it was super sad, but I just didn't feel it like I felt the death of Numa at the end of 2, and Rex was distraught about it, and I just thought, like, that really hit me, because we've been with her the entire game, and we've seen their supposed romance build up, whereas in 3, 3 was weird, because it handles romance really well, like the most adult, not adult I should say, but like the most mature of these Xenoblade games. Then with Mia's relationship is like very down to earth and like thought out. It's not like Xenoblade 2's romance, for example, was like 2 teenagers not knowing if they like each other or not, and they don't want to like exclaim their feelings to each other, and that's perfectly fine, but that was more of like a younger person's view of romance, whereas these guys are like, they're a bit older. Weirdly enough, they don't really understand the concept of like romance until they get to the city and they learn how babies are made, which is like a really funny segment of the game. But then after that, like even before that, they feel this connection that they can't really explain, and then later on they realise what it is. But the weird thing is that like after this whole thing happens with N and M, and like their whole car crash of a romance happens, they just don't seem to like really address the romance, whereas like say with Rex and Pyra, for example, it was always there, and there was always something there to keep you invested in the relationship. And the same thing happened with Shulk and Fiora as well, which, to be fair, I think Shulk and Fiora's one was done really well as well, because he finds Fiora, they're finally back together, and they just want to spend every moment they have left with each other, because we think Fiora's going to die. With Mio and Noah, especially because like to the climax of chapter 5, where that whole thing goes off, Mio's sort of talking, getting worried about her dying, because she's going to be dying in like a month or something, and she's trying to like sort of talk to Noah about it, and Noah's just like, yeah, well, when you're gone, you know, it won't be the end. We'll carry on your wishes and stuff like that. And I just think you are so dense, like, to how this girl feels. And then he goes like full psycho when she's about to die, like from this thing that we knew were coming for ages, and he was like really nonchalant, like not, you know, about not too long beforehand, and it just felt really odd. The turn. Maybe I need to play it again to really feel it, but that felt a bit weird. And then after that whole thing happens, and he and Mia were allowed to live together and that, the romance isn't even there until like a little snippet at the end, which was really sweet. But it's just weird. Yeah, it's just a bit weird. That was all like this as well. So I don't know. It just feels like there's no really consistency in that, and that's the main thing I want to talk about, because it's the most thing I have the most complex feelings of. You know, like I said, I can praise the game everywhere else. Even the music, which I've said is like the weakest soundtrack. Still an incredible soundtrack, it really is. You know, a Xenoblade soundtrack that is the weakest in the series is still better than nearly every other JRPG soundtrack out there, nearly better than any other video game soundtrack out there. It is still so good. Very interested to see how Xenoblade 3 goes moving forward, because the first playthrough left a very more positive but still a mixed reception for me. And also, I'd say quickly that the DLC, the story DLC is coming out. I've seen many say that they would like it to fill in the gaps in the story. I would also like that, but then it would make me pissed off even more at 3, because Xenoblade 2, when that game finished, I was worried about story DLC, because they did the same thing with Xenoblade 2, they announced story DLC for the game before it even came out, and I was pissed off. And then the game came out, I played it, I finished it, and then I was like, oh yeah, there's DLC coming out, and I was so excited for it then, because Xenoblade 2 felt like a full package, it felt like a full game. There was no stone unturned, everything was done brilliantly. And then the DLC come out and Torna was brilliant as well, so that was great. Torna only heightened my love for Xenoblade 2. For Xenoblade 3, I don't even think that something will come out to fill in the gaps between 1/2 and 3, because then it would make it its own thing and not about Xenoblade 3, because Xenoblade 3's story wouldn't even really be involved at that point. You know, it'd be like a prequel before it. And it won't really be about the story of 3, it'll be about the connections to 1 and 2. And that's a big shame, because although I would like that, it would alienate players who only played 3 and not the other 2 games, and then it wouldn't really have anything to do with 3. And from a business point of view, why would Nintendo do that? It'd be very weird to release a DLC that doesn't really have anything to do with the initial game. So that's a bit weird. And I feel like in a way they've left these gaps in the story intentionally, because they want people to wonder and theorise about the future of the series, like they did with Xenoblade 2. But Xenoblade 2, with the conduit pissing off and stuff like that, at that point in the story it wasn't important. You know, that was like, oh wow, that's something that happened. But the important bit was about everything that was happening with the characters from Xenoblade 2's own contained story that led up to the overarching plot. But with 3, it's not at the end of the story to wonder where it's going for the future. It's about before the story. It's about, you know, before this world of Ionis came to existence. That's where the gaps lie. Been talking for a while now, so I'll end it up there. But that's my fat thoughts on Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I'd love to hear what you guys thought of the game as well, down below. And like I said, I want to go back, because I feel like a lot of side quests will build up the world for me and answer some questions I may have. But there's a lot of stuff that I've seen that just doesn't address my issues with the game. That being said, it's still an incredible game. I really am nervous and hopeful for what comes next. The Xenoblade producers in an Ask Developer interview were like really excited to do more in the Xenoblade series, and I'm definitely more excited to play it. But this is the first Xenoblade game that I can say is like made me realise that, oh well, they can make mistakes then, and I'm a bit worried about that for the future.